I'm Ryan. I'm a science teacher.
I'm Cheryl, and I slept through science.
Each episode will tackle a science question you may have learned in school, but can't quite remember or fully explain.
And I'll take the risk of asking the dumb questions so that we can all understand the science we slept through.
The bell has rung. Let's get started. Welcome to Lesson 3.
Yay!
All right, Cheryl, I feel like as the teacher, I should probably know what the lesson is, but you're the one with the questions. So
I know that's pretty weird. Did you not prepare? Where is your outline? Wait, let's see if I remember teacher words from when I was in teacher school a long time ago. Objective and lesson plan and curriculum.
those are all words. Yes.
Yep. All right, Ryan, here's my question for the day.
Yeah.
This is a very well-known science term, but I feel like it also gets used just like in conversation. And I'm curious, I don't know, are people using it incorrectly or correctly when they use it in other ways?
Well, you haven't said it yet, but I can tell you it's probably being used incorrectly because that's generally the way it goes. But maybe not. It depends. What's the term?
Survival of the fittest.
Okay, survival of the fittest.
Because I feel like that's something you could use like in an office, like a really tough workplace, and be like, it's survival of the fittest there. Or like, I think there's other ways that people use it where like everyone would understand what they mean, but I don't know if that's what science means. So I'm curious, like, are we all getting it correct or are we failing?
All right. Well, let's start with the pre-assessment and find out what you already know. So based on what you've heard and the way you've heard it used, what do you think survival of the fittest means?
I mean, I think it means like literally what those words are. Where it's like you survive if you're the fittest. But what does fittest mean? Because fittest isn't actually something we say very much. I think like physically fit is a thing. That's a way we would use fit that would be similar. Or does an object fit, like does a shape fit through that hole in the kid's toy where you match the shapes, like those type of fits. So there's like a physical fit. both of those are physical fit, but they mean different things. So like I think how at least like a lot of people understand it, and how I understand it is it's like if you need to be strong to survive, and if you're not strong, you won't survive. I think when people use that to talk about humans, they might mean like emotional strength, or they might also mean, I feel like colloquially it might mean more like if you're the most cunning, or like if you're cutthroat, if you're willing to like stab your coworkers in the back, then you're gonna get ahead. It's survival of the fittest, and so it kind of feels like it might mean that sometimes. But when
almost like it's used like
word, what?
Almost like it's used like a justification.
Maybe. I'm trying to think of like if someone were to say it, what would they mean by that? Yeah, or like, but I think it goes along with the phrase only the strong survive. So I think it has a lot to do with strength when people say that word. And now I'm trying to remember the origin of it. Is it Darwin? It might be Darwin who said it originally. And that makes me think that it has to do with evolution, because that was kind of his jam. And that makes me think that there might be other elements to it. Yeah.
Okay. You've got some great ideas already, Cheryl. And I think I'm going to start with the same place that you started, which is, what does it mean to be fit? So survival of the fittest, I think you're right, is literal, but I think you also really picked up on the key part is when we use the word fit or fitness, it doesn't always mean the same thing that a scientist would mean when using that same word. So you kind of had that intuition already, and your intuition is correct. But I don't blame people in this instance for using it incorrectly. Actually, in most instances, I don't actually blame people because because physically fit, as we would use that term, like strong or muscular or anything like that, is one example of how an organism could be scientifically fit, but
Okay.
it's not the only way. And so it's not necessarily wrong, but it's not completely right, if that makes sense.
So, like, the fastest cheetah will live the longest.
Depending on the conditions. Here's what I'd like to do. In order to help in order to help you figure it out, I'd like to use a simulation with bunny rabbits.
I don't have any bunnies. Do you have any bunnies?
I mean, I have a simulation that I can show you.
That's weird. This sounds very odd.
Well,
You have
okay.
a bunny
So
simulation?
a bunny simulation. Okay. So you see, we got a
There's
little
the
white
bunny,
rabbit
all
there.
right. Oh,
Yep.
he's hopping.
Hop. Oh yeah, this is an interactive simulation.
Wow.
And what I can do is I can give the bunny another friend, and then
It
they'll
actually said
do,
mate, not friend, Ryan, but
well, it's a special friend. And
is
then
this
they'll
online
do
dating? Is that what it is?
they'll do what bunnies do, and we'll have more bunnies.
Okay. All right.
And if we let them go, then they will continue to do what bunnies do over and
What's that
over and over
what's that
again.
number at the top of the
At the
screen?
top, yep, there's a little number that is just showing you the number of generations. So every time
Whoa.
it goes through, there's another generation of rabbits. So it started with one rabbit, and then there was a second one, and then they had a few offspring, and then each of the offspring had more offspring. And so instead of waiting for the full lifetime of a rabbit before they make more rabbits, they just have a little time there to show each generation. And every time, the reason Cheryl's laughing is every time there's another generation, we're increasing the number of bunnies more or less exponentially until we reach this point where the bunnies take over the world,
Holy moly. They're on
which
every
I love.
continent.
They are on every continent in this example. Yes. So that's when we would start over.
Okay.
So that's great. That's just the basics. There's bunnies, they reproduce, more bunnies, right?
Okay.
But I can add some wolves to the mix.
No.
And if I do add some wolves to the mix, wolves might like to eat bunnies.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add some wolves, and they're going to go through and
Oh.
they're going to eat some bunnies. And in this case, they ate all but one bunny, which means we're out of luck. There's no more bunnies. There go the wolves again. And all the bunnies died. So again, for those who are listening, the bunnies are white. So they have white fur in this example, and they're in sort of a warm environment. So the ground, there's some green plants around, but the ground is brown. Does that sort of make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now I can add another bunny, and I can actually change and give them a mutation. And mutations would be a thing that we could talk about another time if you'd like. But where we can have some bunnies that don't just have white fur, but they have brown fur. And I don't know if you can
I
see it,
know what
Cheryl.
mutations are. It's like a third arm or like a weird alien eye. Like
No,
in Futurama, there's mutants that live in the sewers. I know what
that's
mutations
true. Yep. Maybe we need to do an episode on mutations too. But if you look, as the generations go on now, you're seeing there's more and more brown bunnies. Do you see that?
Yes.
So there's still white bunnies, but we also have brown bunnies that are reproducing. Now, if I introduce wolves into this environment, the wolves are going to come through and they're going to start eating
Ugh.
bunnies. But as you notice, the wolves ate a
Way
lot
more
more
brown.
of, there are a
Yeah.
lot more brown bunnies that are around now because they blend into their background better. And so each time there's more wolves, it's easier for the wolves to see the white bunnies against a brown background than the brown bunnies. Now, of course, they're going to eat some of the brown bunnies, but it's going to be a lot easier for them to eat the white bunnies. And so you'll notice over time, the frequency of white fur in the bunny population is decreasing, and the frequency of brown fur in the bunny population is increasing. As a matter of fact, now I think there's only like 3 or 4 white furred bunnies. Oh, we've got them taking over the world again.
Took over the world.
But so there you go. So that's just a really basic example that hopefully can help you sort of visually see that in this case, the bunnies aren't stronger or faster. What makes them fit
Mm.
is their ability to survive.
Yeah.
Right? Their ability to continue to live and to reproduce. And in this case, it's their fur color that makes them more fit. And so you talked about kind of 2 definitions for fit. One being that, kind of strong or physically fit, like we would think with exercise. And the other one was like how a lock fits into a key, right?
Yeah.
That type of a fit. And it's really more of that type of a fit that this term, survival of the fittest, is talking about. It's really talking mostly about how an organism fits into its environment.
Interesting.
But this exact same situation, I can change the environment, and sometimes environments do change. So if I do this again, I add another rabbit. So I'm starting over. So we have 2 white bunnies to start with. And then I'm going to give them the mutation so that they can get some brown bunnies in there as well. But this time, instead of being in a warm climate where kind of it's kind of sandy and brown background, I'll put them in an Arctic climate where there's snow on the ground. They're the exact same rabbits with the exact same characteristics, either white fur or brown fur. But now, which rabbit is more fit in this case, Cheryl?
The white ones.
The white ones. And we can test that by adding the wolves, and they'll come
Always
through.
a good way to test something.
Always add more wolves. Yep.
Wool.
And you'll notice that this time around with the wolves, there's still some brown bunnies, but there are a lot fewer than there are of white bunnies. A lot more of the white bunnies survive because they are more fit to their environment.
Oh.
There's a lot of wolves.
And a lot of wolves.
Oh, and it looks like we maybe lost all of our brown bunnies that time around. So it isn't necessarily that one thing is always more fit than another. It depends on the environment, and environments can change.
Oh, okay.
Right? So seasonally things can change, with snow or no snow. So that can be a thing. But typically when we're talking about the environment, we're talking overall. So sometimes, a particular, there's a new organism that gets introduced that maybe doesn't have any predators. My favorite example is the cane toad in Australia. There is, okay, so this is just a side note. Y'all don't necessarily need to do this, but if you're looking for some great entertainment, go to YouTube and search for cane toad, an unnatural history. And it's a documentary from probably the 80s, and it's hilarious. So the cane toad was introduced. It's actually from Hawaii, I think, and they introduced it in Australia to try and take care of an insect that was eating the sugarcane. But the toad ended up not eating the insect, and it had no natural predators because it wasn't from there. And so it just ran rampant and took over Australia in a crazy way. But the video is just it's not trying to be funny, but it's funny. It's
really
hilarious. Oh, you've got to check it out. But it's a really good example of how sometimes maybe the environment isn't changing, but the organism is moved to a new environment. With humans, with us, we do that a lot, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not. There was a lot of that when people traveled by ship. Sometimes, rats or some, smaller organisms would stow aboard a ship and go from one part of the world to another part of the world where they weren't before, and their environment changed. So something that maybe was an advantage to them in one place became a disadvantage in another, or vice versa. So
Mm.
so getting to that survival part, that's the key. Survival of the fittest means the organisms that fit their environment the best are the most likely to survive and pass on that trait to the next generation.
So I was talking about a cheetah that could run the fastest,
Yep.
thinking that if they can run faster, then they would be more likely to survive
Mm-hmm.
because outrunning prey and catching their prey, both things. And
You
you
mean
were saying
outrunning predators?
depends. What?
You said outrunning prey and running faster to
And
catch their
catching
prey.
their prey as well. Both
That's the
things.
same
Getting
thing.
food and not becoming someone else's food.
So outrunning predators.
Yes. Wrong word.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Outrunning predators and not yeah, and then catching prey. Um, and you were saying that depends.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a time when being fast wouldn't help an animal survive?
Off the top of my head, if their food source changed and being able to run quickly wasn't what made them more able to catch their prey, for example,
Oh,
right? So
yeah, yeah.
maybe a huge environmental shift happens. I don't know, an asteroid hits some part on Earth and totally changes the climate around the planet very quickly, and those animals run, like all of those animals die, or maybe they get a disease, and so the ones that they typically would run after aren't the ones that they can get, and now the animals that are available to them burrow underground. So the cheetahs that run fast aren't actually able, because their prey that usually they have to run fast to get aren't around anymore, and
Mhm.
instead the ones that maybe had are more able to dig and burrow or smell their prey more accurately and find them,
Mm,
or
I
I'm
see.
I'm just guessing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But if the environment changes, then that trait that was an advantage and did make them more fit may no longer make them fit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, I'm using animal examples, and
Hmm.
so are you.
Yep.
Does it only apply to animals, or are there other is it like all living things or
Yep. It would apply to all living things.
okay.
So animals are the things we are most familiar with. So those are the examples we use the most. But plants, it definitely applies to plants. It's different traits for them. Sometimes it's the ones that are more able to attract a pollinator, right? Like a bee or something to come and get its pollen to then,
Oh,
move its genetic material from one flower to another, from one plant to another, so
so
they
it
can
might
make
be like
seeds.
the brightest
Yep.
flowers that it has or
Yep.
things like that.
Yep. Or if it's like, if they attract flies as pollinators, it might be the smelliest,
Mm,
or whatever it is. So yeah, it could be things like that. I'm also going to use an example that's, been on people's minds a lot over the last year or so. And COVID-19 is a virus. And it's a perfect example, because if you've heard of the variants that they've talked
yeah,
about, right?
yes.
So viruses can mutate very, very quickly. And again, we can do another thing on mutations later if we need to. But basically, it means they can change what traits they have. And they don't do it on purpose, but it just happens naturally. And so some of these viruses, if they mutate in a way that makes them more infectious, easier to spread from person to person, that is going to make them more fit to the environment than they were before. And
Oh,
so it spreads more easily, and that virus ends up taking over instead of the previous version of the virus,
oh, okay. That makes
because
sense.
it's more fit. It's more able to whatever spread, infect cells, stay longer, hide from the immune system, whatever those things are, or some combination thereof.
Mm, that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're just super, super buff viruses, and that's
Super, super buff viruses.
they're just,
Exactly.
like, ripped.
Ripped.
Yeah.
Yeah, except not. So the last part that you mentioned that I think is also really relevant, and you said, like, where did it come from? And is it like, does it have to do with Darwin? And yes, it does.
Oh,
Survival of the fittest. Yay, good memory. Survival of the fittest is basically, you can think of it sort of as the slogan of natural selection. So natural
oh yeah, I've
selection,
heard that term.
yeah, natural selection is one of the mechanisms that drives evolution. And evolution is a much bigger umbrella, but the most common way that we usually think of evolution is through natural selection. And survival of the fittest is basically natural selection. The way that nature selects or chooses one particular organism over the other is whether or not it is more fit to its environment, which again just means it's more likely to survive and pass its genes on to the next generation, which means that trait is going to be more and more common as the generations go on because they're more likely to survive. So it's not really, a choosing, it's not natural selection. It isn't that nature sits there and says, well, I like the butterflies that have blue wings, so I'm going to pick those ones, right? It's
Yeah.
not intentional, but it's
Natural
basically,
selection.
it's natural, exactly. And so that's basically it, Cheryl.
Cool.
There you go, survival of the fittest. Okay, Cheryl, pop quiz time.
The worst part of the podcast.
Oh, come on, you do fine on these.
Every single time I get a quiz. What if you showed up to a class and had a quiz every single day?
There are classes that
Do
do
that?
that.
Do you
I
do that
don't.
with your students?
No, I don't
Okay,
do that.
good. I'm so glad.
But there are classes that do.
Gross. I do not want to attend those classes.
Okay, first question. What does fit in survival of the fittest mean?
Oh boy, this is going to be a tough define the word without using the word in your definition. Because immediately I wanted to say that it fits. That's how you know. Fit means that it is best suited for its environment, which means which means a whole variety of things. But it means that it's best suited for an environment to survive, essentially.
Great.
Are you satisfied with that answer?
I am satisfied with that answer.
Okay.
Question 2. How do you know which organism is the fittest?
That's a hard question. I mean, wait a couple generations and see which ones are still around. Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
I was trying to joke. Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, the one that is most likely to survive and reproduce is the fittest.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
See, you
I
knew it and
mean,
you didn't even know you knew it.
depending, you could see, like, if it's an animal, like, oh, who's
Mhm.
eating? Who is not getting eaten? Things like that.
Mhm. Yep.
But okay, cool.
Yep. Exactly.
All right.
Okay. Question 3. Why is the strongest organism not always the fittest organism?
Because that's only one variable, or that's only one aspect, and it's not true across the board. It
What's not true across the board?
it all that being stronger is makes it easier to survive. It depends. It all depends.
What does it
And
depend
so
on?
other aspects in the environment or changes in the environment as well. And
There
so
you
whatever
go.
the situation is, then sometimes being stronger would help, but sometimes it would make no difference or maybe even be a negative. Possibly.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think this is obviously not this is not a real world thing, but you think of those like bodybuilders who are so big that they can't fit through a doorway and they have to turn sideways.
That's exactly what I was picturing. And then what if they have to hide in like a hole
Yep.
and
But
they
they're so
can't use
big.
their muscles? Yeah.
Mhm. Yep, exactly. But legitimately, sometimes that is the case, that
Mm.
if you are super strong, that actually could be a negative depending on the conditions and the environment. Yep, exactly. All right, last question.
All right.
Finish well. Give an example or explain how survival of the fittest in an office environment, like you referenced,
Okay.
could be an accurate representation of survival of the fittest, and give an example of how it might not be an accurate representation of survival of the fittest.
Well, okay. Well, right off the bat, something I'm realizing is that how it's just going to be inaccurate is that people don't stay in the same office for generations upon generations, which means how it's not an example is that those traits aren't necessarily being like genetically passed down
Mm.
to their children, and their children aren't even working in that same office. Wouldn't even really be able to see like over generations how certain traits are helping or hindering. And so that's a way that it's like not the same. Has nothing to do with reproduction. However, if you compare it to like being fired or being promoted, that could be a similar thing to being eaten or not being eaten, essentially.
Mhm.
And within that, it has nothing to do with physical strength, but it would be all sorts of other aspects that could make someone survive. It might be like that they're super charismatic, or that they're smart, or that they are really quick on their feet or a good problem solver. I mean, just like any aspect that people value in the workplace, that helps someone do better at their job or just like thrive amongst their coworkers, or that makes their boss notice them. And in those ways, it could be, I think it could be similar. It's like who ends up sticking around for the long haul and doing well in this environment. And that will depend on the environment. Like just having a sense of humor
Mhm.
help depends on where you work for if it helps. It might sometimes, and it might hurt other times. So because there's different things that are valued in different workplaces.
Excellent. You pass with flying colors.
Yay! Woohoo! But hopefully no one's having babies at work. So
Yeah, no, no, thank you. Well, I'm gonna put in our we'll put in our show notes, and I might even do a link to the simulation that I showed you, the bunny simulation. So if you want to play around with it yourself, try some
I mean,
things.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm guessing everyone else does too.
Yep, for sure. So I'll put a link to that. And then if I can find the cane toad video, and I can find where that is on YouTube, I'll put a link to that one too, because even though it's not directly related to survival of the fittest, it is a little bit related to natural selection, and it's hilarious. So it's worth it.
So fun. I love it.
All right, well, we got about 5 minutes left, so it's time to go ahead and pack your stuff up and get ready for my closing remarks. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at I Slept Through Science, or on Twitter at Slept Science.
If you have dumb science questions like I do, please send them to us. You can email us at isleptthroughscience@gmail.com, or you can even send us a voice memo and we'll play it on the podcast.
Please rate and review our podcast to tell other people what you think about it, subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode, and share about our podcast on social media.
Thank you to Beth Reed Miller for the artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. Okay, great. Thanks. Bye.
The bell doesn't dismiss you. I dismiss you.